quick so we can get out and watch the Browns win today. You won't believe how excited our city was last Thursday when we won, so I always make jokes. I'm a big Carolina Panthers fan. I'm a Steelers fan in the back. You know, you guys finally got to win, right? Before I get into the message this morning, I wanted to just, again, thank you for being a church that is faithful, to be a part of what God is doing in the city of Cleveland through Envision. So many times you may feel like we can't ever get up to Cleveland, or it's like we're not doing enough, but you guys are part of the bigger picture that God is making. You don't only give faithfully to the ministry of Tori and I, but you also pray for us. And I cover your prayers more so than anything else. Because knowing that the power of prayer, you interceding on our behalf is huge. If you kept up with us very much in the past couple of months, I shared with the Sunday School Hour that it's been pretty tough, probably more so emotionally for parents, because our daughter Riley has cerebral palsy, and with that sometimes comes some just hard stuff. And so a dental procedure that kind of went a little more scary than we thought it was. I was sharing Riley was probably, this is the first time she was scared going to surgery, and that was not been usually normal. But then she comes out on the other end with Elsa in hand, singing "Let It Go," and she's coming back too. Riley does well, but sometimes parents, it's a little bit tough. So Lori, being our main caretaker for Riley, wasn't given as many details about the oral procedure she had. And my wife is very much a detail person. She likes to know everything that's going to happen. And so the day before we heard from our surgeon, which many surgeons are just get to the facts, right? They're never like, oh, we're going to be here, it's going to be okay. It's like, we're going to pop some chiclets out, and we're going to do a couple cuts here, and we're going to put the expander in, and she'll wake up 4 to 6 hours later. Of course, my wife is like, what? She's like, oh, I need to sit down for a second. Riley went through the procedure okay, but is doing a bit better now. But now I'm doing some GI testing. So we just want to say thank you for praying. We absolutely
just walk in the back of
continue to pray for us.
Sanctuary.
Because I still believe when I heard about 11 years ago from a pastor at a conference that Riley continues to open more, she'll open more doors for the gospel than you ever will. And so even through the tough things and the medical stuff and taking care of Riley wants everybody to be noticed. And so what do I mean by that? My daughter says hi to everyone. And so in her last GI test at Columbus, she's on her hospital bed and rolled back to be put under sedation for a bit. She makes sure that everybody that she rolls by, she says hi to. And my daughter, through some of the tough things in life, still can teach me so much about who God is and how much that she wants people to know you're important. And so it's not only the nurses and the doctors, it's the janitor. Hi. And so I share that because I love my family for one, but I also just a reminder to us that your prayers are important. Your investment in our family is important too. And just because Riley deals with those harder things, I do celebrate too with my son. I share with the Sunday school class that my son made the basketball team. And you're like, oh, that's no big deal. But for us, it was a big surprise in our house because my son just started playing basketball this summer. And we both thought, you're probably not going to make it. He's one up against 7th and 8th grade. He's going in 6th grade. And he called me on Friday night. I was in Minneapolis having some meetings in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And he's like, Dad, I made the team. I'm like, that's awesome. And in the back of my mind, going, how do you make the team? And I think he's like, Dad, I don't know how I made the team. And because we were going over what he did in basketball tryouts, he's like, I didn't do layups very well. I didn't shoot very well. I said, well, what was your big victory? What did you do? Like, man, this is really cool. And he goes, well, Dad, at the very beginning of practice, they had everybody do all wall sits. So we get to sit like this up against the wall as long as you possibly can. And he says, whoever went the longest, that grade got to skip out on all the sprints, and they call them suicides. They had to do 25 of them. He's like, Dad, I sat for 30 minutes up against the wall. And so all the 6th graders didn't have to do suicides. And I was like, you know, maybe that's why you got to be on the basketball team. But we're celebrating some cool things in our life. And we'll continue to celebrate the good things that God is doing in Cleveland. I always share with people, like, God has been doing a lot of things before we got there, but He is surely doing great things now that Envision is there. But it's nothing of our doing necessarily. We just enjoying Him on mission. And so we celebrate this past summer through our teams and internships. We had over 25 young people coming to Christ through art camps and basketball camps. We're seeing people that are coming through our English program, ESL, which stands for English as a Second Language. We have a center called The Bridge where they're learning English. But some of those students have been attending a church plant for refugees. And so they're encouraged at the church plants that they're meeting on Sunday afternoons to share the stories that they're learning here. And so some of our students are now coming back to the center and wanting to see if I need to share something. They share the story they learned at the church plant. And so all their friends that are not Christians are hearing these stories about Jesus. And so people are getting excited, not only about English, but they're also getting excited about Jesus as well. And so just thank you for investing, and we continue to look forward as our partnership continues to grow. It's always refreshing to come down here. My son got out of the truck and he goes, oh, it smells so good here. And so he's like, it feels like we're in the mountains. I'm like, well, I can hear cars. He's like, it's the river, Dad. Just think about it. So it's always good to come here. It's good to see familiar faces. And it's always encouraging to my son. He got up this morning, we're on the way down. He goes, is this the church where it really goes? And I said, yes. On purpose, which is good. So this morning, if you got your Bibles, turn to John 4. I'll be reading out of the ESV. And many of you guys have probably read this story about the Samaritan woman, but I prayed this morning that we may be able to pull some things out of this passage that may be something new or be a challenge to us. Chapter 4, verse 7. It says, a woman from Samaria came to draw water. Jesus said to her, give me a drink. For the disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, how is it you... Oh, sorry.
It came on.
Good?
Yeah.
God wanted you to hear that part, right? Can you guys hear me good now? All right.
Okay.
Pick up right there in verse 9. Is that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a woman of Samaria? For Jews have no dealing with Samaritans. Jesus answered her, if you knew the gift of God and who is it that is saying to you, give me a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. The woman said to him, sir, you have nothing to draw water with, and the well is deep. Where do you get the living water?
It's off again.
Are you greater than your father Jacob? He gave us the well and drank from it himself, and did his sons and his livestock. Jesus said to her, everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks of the water that I will give will never be thirsty again. The water that I will give him will become a spring of water welling up in eternal life. The woman said to him, sir, give me this water so that I will not be thirsty or have to come to draw near water again. Jesus said to her, go call your husband and come here. The woman answered him, I have no husband. Jesus said to her, you are right in saying, I have no husband, for you have 5 husbands, and the one you have now is not your husband. What you have said is true. The woman said to him, sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you say that in Jerusalem is the place where people ought to worship. And Jesus said to her, woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming, and is now here, when the true worshipers will worship the Father and the Spirit and truth. For the Father is seeking such people to worship Him. God is Spirit, and those who worship Him must worship in spirit and truth. The woman that said to him, I know the Messiah has come. When He comes, He will tell us all things. She said to her, I will speak to you, and He Just then the disciples came back. They marveled that he was talking with a woman, but no one said, "Who do you seek?" or "Why are you talking with her?"
Yeah, he turned it off.
So the woman left her water jar and went away into town and said to the people, "Come and see a man who told me all I ever did. Can this be the Christ?" Then went out from town were coming to him. Meanwhile the disciples were urging him, saying, "Rabbi, eat." But he said to them, "I have no food to eat that you do not know about." So the disciples said to one another, "Has anyone brought him something to eat?" Jesus said to them, "My food is to do with the will of who sent me and to accomplish his work. Do you not say that there are yet 4 months, then comes the harvest? Look, I tell you, lift up your eyes and see the fields are white for harvest. Already the one who reaps is receiving wages and gathering food for eternal life. So the sower and reaper may rejoice together. For here the saying holds true. One sows, another reaps. I sent you to reap that which you do not labor. Others have labored, and you have entered into their labor." Lord, I pray this morning, as we walk through bits and pieces of this passage, Lord, that you will challenge us in this. Lord, that your word would be alive, and that it will be piercing to us. Lord, I am convinced that you do not give your word that makes me a good book to read and walk away. But you've given us the very words of our Father, so that we may be challenged and be changed. And we ask all these things in your precious name. This morning, some of you, like I said, have maybe heard this passage. You may try the mic again. Sorry, keep cutting in and out.
Do you want to use the pulpit mic? It's right in front of it.
Just stay here.
Yeah, do you want to use that?
I will try to stay behind the mic.
Yeah.
Everybody hear me okay now? Okay. So what's going on is an overview of kind of what's going on here. If you know anything about the Samaritan woman or about the Samaritan people, as we heard maybe quickly here, that the Jews didn't hang out with Samaritans. It wasn't something that was normal. Okay? That's the first thing. You wouldn't see Jews and Samaritans hanging out. But then you also see this Samaritan woman that is coming out and getting water. And as she's getting water, she's not getting it with the ladies. If you were to find places in other cultures around the world, a place like Burkina Faso, the watering hole or the well is a place where everybody hangs out. It's a place where a lot of times women would hang out and they would talk junk. They would gossip. They would hang out with each other and get water, and they would return back to their villages or where they came from. But the Samaritan woman is there by herself. And it says, if you do more research, that she's not only there in the morning, but she's there in the middle of the afternoon where nobody will be found there during that time. We see a lady that is here because she's ashamed of something. There will be no other reason for her to be out there by herself except for that. She's a lady that even in our culture, that may be a lady that people would say, don't let your kids go near that person. She's a lady that's probably done something and has been turned away by her own people. Because she's not there with anybody like herself, and she's there in the middle of the day. But yet we find Jesus going out of his way to go past the well here. They could have gone other directions, they could have gone other ways, but we find Jesus stopping and having an interaction with this lady, which in the very beginning is very surprising to the lady. He asked her right there in the very first part of the passage, give me a drink. And the Samaritan woman said to him, how is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a woman of Samaria? She's baffled. Why are you talking to me? And Jesus says to her, Jesus answered her, if you knew the gift of God and who is that is saying to you, give me a drink, you would ask me and I would have given you living water. So as Jesus begins to interact with her, they have this interaction. He's beginning the conversation of a spiritual talk, and she is perceiving it as living water. She comes here by herself, and she's looking for water, and she's probably thinking, is this guy talking about like water that I would never have to be thirsty again? That means I would never have to come back out here in public by myself again. I don't know about you this morning, but I don't know how many times have you have come personally to to a place where you don't want to be seen. Or maybe you know somebody like the Samaritan woman that doesn't want to be seen, that is afraid to go out in public. I shared this message a couple months ago in an area that a lady came to me and she goes, I was that woman that you would keep your kids away from. In Cleveland, we see this more times than I would like to admit. The lady that's out walking around and she has no idea where she's at because she just had a night of hell. She sold her body I don't know how many times. And the payment for that was drugs. And even as I shared and I walked, I had my brother-in-law and his wife came to visit from Atlanta. And I'm ashamed to say this, but they're like, what's up with her? As I've been preparing for this message this week, I wonder, do we relate to the Samaritan woman or do we know somebody like the Samaritan woman? But yet Jesus, going outside of cultural barriers and cultural stigmatisms that people have had about the Samaritans, he sits down with the woman from Samaria and begins to have a conversation with her because I find that Jesus has no barriers of who he's going to talk to. Jesus has no barriers or no cultural faux pas or anything like that, but we're not going to go hang out with people that look different. He actually picked the woman that we hear a lot about in the Bible that the people they don't like. Right? We talk about the Good Samaritan, right? It was the guy that was of no value that stopped and helped the person that was in need. Jesus even talks about it in Acts 1:8, that you will be my disciples, or you will be my witness among Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria, that place that nobody goes. But Jesus stops to minister to her, to talk with her. Jesus and the woman's interaction starts out as this conversation, and he's saying about water, and she's getting excited because I don't have to come back to this well anymore. And the woman said in verse 15, the woman said, Sir, give me this water so that I don't have to be thirsty or have to come to draw water anymore. I'm ashamed. I don't like having to come and do this. I'm embarrassed about this. So yes, please give me this water you talk about because I don't want to be thirsty and I don't have to come back out in public anymore. She's been going through the ridicule, but she's still focused on that. And then Jesus says to her in verse 16, it's really interesting how Jesus does that, right? He's talking to her and he's letting her talk. He's listening. But he quickly goes into, Jesus said to her, go call your husband and come here. And I tell people, things just got real. Oh, this is kind of cool talking to this guy. He's talking about how you give me some cool water, then I'll have to come back out here again. But then he goes, go call your husband. The woman answered him, I have no husband. How many times has Jesus done that to us? Hey, Paul, let me ask you about something. Well, Jesus, you don't know about that. And she even goes that with Jesus right now. Well, I don't have a husband. Because he just asked this question that kind of felt uncomfortable to her. And she goes, no, I don't have a husband. And then what does Jesus say? You are right by having I have no husband, for you have had 5 husbands, and the one you know now is not your husband. What you have said is true. So as Jesus begins to speak with this lady, starting out with in her mind was just talking about water. Jesus talks about this husband thing, and then exposes her for who she really is. As I read this passage, and it's a passage I've become to just really love, I find myself a little bit jealous of the Samaritan woman. The reason why is because at this moment right here, this lady has nowhere else to go. Jesus just exposed her. And I always wonder, what if Jesus took your sins or your struggles and put them up here on the whiteboard for everybody to see? it's kind of like that for her because she's been hiding this for so long. She goes to great measures to hide these things from everybody else. She goes to great measure to hide herself from people. She's out in the middle of the day. She's getting water by herself. She probably doesn't have any friends. People probably hide their kids from her. But now there's a man that has no idea who she is until that moment, and Jesus says, talk to me about your husbands. And she goes on and says, are you a prophet? It's crazy. She was probably somewhat of an adulteress. She tries to lie about her sin, but is soon convicted. The crazy thing is that Jesus wanted to bless her with living water, but had to deal with the sin first. Why would I be jealous of the Samaritan woman? Because for the first time, this lady had come somewhere and somebody called her out for who she really was, but wasn't condemning her. He wanted to interact with her. He wanted to love her this moment. We don't know how long this conversation took place, but I can imagine they're probably shooting the breeze a little bit. They're talking about life. And this stuff comes up. And Jesus doesn't go, shame on you. He says, I want to give you living water. I want you to feel loved again. I want you to feel important. This morning you may be here and you're going, that's me. I haven't felt that kind of love ever. Or I have not felt that love in a while. But you may be on the other side as we have the responsibility to love people the way Jesus loves people. That the ladies of Samaria are in our lives on a consistent basis. And many times we do like the disciples do. They would go around the city. We would go around the village to escape them. If I were to ask you guys in here, to be honest, I would say, who is that person that you walk around or go the other direction so you don't have to interact with them? But at this moment, Jesus stopped to love this lady. So whether you're here and you're going, Paul, that's me. Or Paul, I struggle with this in loving people. I would agree the same for myself. See, the idea is that she starts to be talking a very spiritual conversation with her, because you can see right here in verse 21, the woman, or Jesus, she asked a question in verse 19, I'm sorry. The woman said to him, Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you say that in Jerusalem is the place where people ought to worship. Jesus said to her, Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming and is now here. Okay, don't forget that. But the hour is coming and is now, right? He's here right now. Okay? When the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father is seeking such people to worship Him. God is spirit, and those who worship Him must worship in spirit and truth. So Jesus comes to this lady, shouldn't be talking to her because she's a Samaritan, has a conversation with her, begins to love her, continues to talk about living water to her, calls her out and says, hey, you've got some things you probably need to work on, things you need to deal with. I know who you are. And then he goes, and she asks this question, well, I thought those that worship the God are actually in Jerusalem. That thing you're talking about is not for me, because I'm out here. And what does Jesus say to her? I am here now. And I'm looking for people just like you. What a breath of confidence into a woman that has had no confidence, that has no identity, except for the woman that goes out and gets water at weird times because she's embarrassed to be in public. And Jesus is saying to her, I love you, I care for you, and I want you to be the person that is worshiping me right now. I'm looking for somebody just like someone that is broken, someone that is not lovely, I am looking for you. This past summer, I had a chance to do a basketball camp. And we give out basketballs at the end of our camps. And this one day that we were giving out basketballs, this one young kid, he came like 2 days late. But he wasn't a very good basketball player. And he came and his clothes were pretty tethered and pretty messed up. But he started coming and he was faithful for those next 3 days. And as we began to hand out basketballs, he came up to me. And as I gave him a basketball, he had tears rolling down his face. And he said, "Thank you for this basketball. I've never had a basketball this nice." And for a moment, I'm going, it's just a basketball. But in that same moment, I realized that maybe somebody hasn't even cared enough to give this young man a basketball. For 3 days, that young man heard about Jesus. And yet all the good basketball players, you know, if someone said thank you, someone didn't, but this kid came to me and says, "Thank you for this basketball." And my mind quickly goes to somebody like the Samaritan woman, that for the first time, maybe in her whole life, somebody gave her value. I know who you are. I know the problems you've had with me. I know where you're at right now. I know why you're out here. I know why you're struggling right now. But I love you. I care for you. And I'm looking for somebody just like you to follow me, to worship me. I don't know about you, but I would love to be able to hear those words from Jesus. Looking for you. The people that I go by each and every day, a lot of times can get very overwhelming and even frustrating at times. Even to the point where you're like, why am I even here? The lady that I just shared about, the lady that I see on a regular basis in a place where you guys had trash can, you were doing the trash duty during New City. I haven't called her name yet, but I watch her. I watch her sell her body day in and day out. I watch her fumble around because she's on something. I wonder, what would it happen if she could get clear enough to be able to hear the words, "I love you. I have a plan for you. I want you to worship me." You in your own life may be that person too. I want to know that. And I'm here to tell you that Jesus is here for you. That you may get plastered all your junk on the screen up here. But yet there's still one person that says, "You know what? I love you. And I died for you." But most of us, if not all of us, have people in our own lives that somebody needs to hear those words for themselves. Jesus is not only sharing this great story to us and to see how awesome Christ is, but he's also challenging us to be like him. Jesus says, "Follow me, do as I do." And our challenge can also be, who is that Samaritan woman in your life? Who is that person in your life that needs to hear those words? I love you. You have a purpose. God has a plan for your life. And he wants you to follow him. Maybe it's that person in your job that you need to speak to. Maybe it's that person you go to school with. Or maybe it's the person across town that doesn't look like you. Or even somebody that doesn't believe like you. As we see this picture come out, we understand that the Lord desires a broken heart. Somebody dependent solely on him. As they see this conversation work out, the response of the woman here in verse 25. The woman said to him, "I know that Messiah is coming. He who is called the Christ," which is what Messiah means. "When he comes, he will tell us all things." And Jesus said to her, but she still doesn't get it. Jesus said to her, "I who speak, that's me. That guy Messiah you're talking about, that's me. And her response is, right there after the disciples come back, just when the disciples came back, they marveled what